Yeah, thanks again from me for being here, and I hoped you had a day full of learnings. The thing I learned is that the program was so rich for me and I couldn't follow any track appropriately. So I had to decide where to go, but what I heard was really fantastic. We started off the day with a keynote by Professor Dirk Becker on big data in search of metadata, and so he represented sort of the sociological perspective on the subject matter. And when we were talking about one ring to rule them all, that was an idea that came up very early in the process, and we all know what it relates to. And what I wish for is that we round off the day with some thoughts about how we're going to work in the future. And the question, one ring to rule them all, so basically is the question, as Stephanie said, it's will we be Gollum or will we be Frodo? And Jörg pre-potentially said, I'm going to be Sauron. But I would say that if we are going to the metaphor, which is in there, Sauron could be the devil and Gandalf could be God. So I'd rather stick to sort of the human beings that might end. So.
Wait, we're not talking about the gods of content strategy because
no.
I think this is ripe time to discuss them too.
Right.
Yeah, I would go for that too.
Yeah. Okay. No, think what we learned. So we know that Facebook, and no offense, Clay, is sort of live testing on us. We learned that algorithm and robots are in sports journalism and also going into stock market journalism. Everything is automated. We also learned that business is about minimizing risk, and we have learned that our future behavior is predictably unpredictable, and we know that strategic communication is about purposeful communication that wants to fulfill a mission, and we learned a lot about storytelling. So, Ansgar, I would like to start with you. Will the chief communication officer in the future, will that be a data scientist, a data analyst, or will there be space for those old PR guys with a gut feeling of how things are going out there?
Yeah, so I think there will be, or there are managers, and that means they need, obviously, data. As a chief executive officer, you need a lot of data in the end, or information. But that's only one part of the story. You need how to deal with them, and we heard a lot about that, how to frame it, how to understand it. In the first talk, it was about, what is meta? Is there meta or not? No, I think it's data, but the question is, how do we understand data? Where do we look for the right and relevant data? And I think that's exactly the challenge nowadays, not just to build up new data or more data, but to understand which kind of data we need and how to use it. And I think that's also a danger at the moment, that a lot of service providers are monitoring, producing a lot of data. But what we see in corp comm departments nowadays sometimes is that they acquire all these data because it's there, because it's probably cheap or available. But the question is, what is necessary? Where does it help us? And so the experience and the knowledge, what are my goals? What do I need? I think that's also in the future very important.
Marco, you as a content strategist, we did an interview, published it on PR Blogger before that. You're going about content strategy very methodologically. You're saying you base your work on research. So which questions would you learn from big data applications from what we learned? Because currently we have like retargeting and companies trying to sell me the stuff I already bought. So that's a sort of a poor outcome.
Right.
But what would you be interested to learn from the big data stuff?
Well, I'd say, in my work, I focus on that combination of, I think, data to impose reality on gut instinct, but then also gut instinct to impose humanity on data. And to your point, to make sure that we're asking the right questions of the data we're collecting. I mean, I think it's, I don't know where Rahel is sitting, but I think I heard you give the example in a workshop maybe a year ago or so, where you said 12 is nothing. But when we contextualize it and say, oh, it's 12 degrees, is it 12 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius? Then from that we can gain information, like, do I need to wear a sweater today? Do I need to put on a coat? All of those types of things. And I think that once we can start asking good questions of our data, that's when it becomes more meaningful. And I think in my work as a content strategist, that a lot of that kind of collection starts even before we get into big data, just in looking at things on more of the microscopic level, like through a content audit. We can't just collect that data, then we just get kind of stuck in it. But when we collect that data to ask questions of it, to say, all right, well, how well is our current content upholding our communication goals? Can we measure that quantitatively and qualitatively? Then it becomes more meaningful. Otherwise, it's just numbers.
Okay, so you're also reflecting on the storytelling part of that, and you told your story about how you came into content strategy and what it means to you. So Jörg, who's the better storyteller, the data scientist or the content folks?
I can't remember who said that, but someone on Strata conference last year said the CMO, so the Chief Marketing Officer, will be a data scientist very soon in most companies. Yeah, I see something, some movement in that direction. I guess that we will turn it the other way around. Stories without good data science behind that might be sounding more ridiculous in the future, because the tools are at hand. We have Google Trends, we have all kinds of search tools that everyone can access easily. So if I tell a story and just make up my mind, and someone questions that by using these tools, things become very easy, obvious very easily. This is one thing, and the second is failure also becomes obvious quite soon now. So if I may make this A/B testing thing that I've been talking about in my talk also, I recognize if I'm wrong, and not in a theoretical, hypothesis-driven way, but I see it immediately. I see I'm wrong now. That does not mean I'm wrong in the future, but for the time being, it's not the right decision, and I can correct it. So this is the agile way of telling stories, the agile way of making decisions, and this will lead to data science-driven marketing, data science-driven communication.
Okay, so Ansgar, could big data be part of the listening architecture you mentioned?
Yeah, so I don't really agree. I think we have to look at different fields of communication and marketing. I fully agree that in traditional marketing, it makes sense, because if we look a bit more in detail, what can be predicted, what can be used. Obviously, we have a lot of routines. And buying, for example, in many cases is routine buying, and that's exactly where it helps for some shopping models and so on. But you know, corporations in a longer sense, if you look at the internal communication which is in, we have a lot of decisions which are not so much predictable, because the question where I'm working or what is my decision for taking up the next job, there's so many circumstances, it's more different. So we need it. I think we need this information, but I think how we use it will be quite different. So it will be part of a listening architecture, yes, again, but how we use it and how important it is for our decisions as communicators or as managers, that really makes a difference. And then we have to go back, because content, if you talk content strategy, you know, from research, obviously we have two different traditions. One is obviously the analysis in the traditional sense from computer science, and then in communication science we have a tradition of content analysis, and not a theory or the practice about this says us that it's not technical, but it's in the mind of people who do this analysis, and it can be supported by, obviously, tools, but in the end, the interpretation, what you do about that, is done by people. And all the semantic analysis stuff and working together with our computer scientists, our university, you really see that two worlds are coming together, and you need both of them. Otherwise, we have a lot of data, and it can answer some questions, but probably not the real management type questions. Otherwise, all in the last centuries, a lot of also management studies in science, we had a lot of approaches to identify excellence by analysis of the past. It didn't work out. So you need it, but in the end you need management decisions which are framed by human beings and other processes.
Did I understand you correctly that those tools are not only available to corporate communicators, but to each and every one of us? Because we have like privacy tools like PGP, but people don't use it. So theoretically, you're right. But so how's the power balance, and what could we do to sort of enable sort of normal people to use those tools?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Benedict, whom I've shown in my talk also, and me, we have developed a sort of didactical concept. It's called Streetfighting data science. It's using tools like Google tools, like Excel spreadsheets or so, but doing real data science with that. For example, we show people how to access the APIs of social media or of Crunchbase, for example, to draw financial data from that and make analysis on that. And of course, this is not trivial. You can't just start and using Python scripts without the slightest knowledge of programming. You should be at least aware that you should take some time to take a course on Coursera or wherever to get familiar with the way things are done there. So it's not without prior knowledge, but that's not necessary. Not everyone needs to be a data scientist. So as with Twitter, for example, it's sufficient that someone on Twitter mentions a quality issue with my brand. I don't need a representative sample of thousands of people to derive that I have a quality problem. One symptom is enough if I really have this problem. I can say, oh, someone is complaining about a problem, and yes, oh, I have this problem, and I have detected it that way. And the same is true for using data science to do things with the data. It's like a small bunch of people is sufficient to deconstruct all the stories we are told. So it is not necessarily everyone. It's a sufficient set of people. Okay. And I'm quite convinced that we already have that.
But where does that leave you as a storyteller?
Well, and I'm just curious, like in response to what you just said, like looking at, all right, somebody says something on Twitter of like maybe you need to course correct or adjust something with your brand perception, or maybe like what you're tweeting about or frequency or something along those lines. So in that case, it's like you're taking one data point, maybe just one interaction, one anecdote, and using that in place of broader data? Or are you extrapolating data, anecdote from data, or what's going on there?
So, I would say this is the main difference between statistical inference, where I take a representative sample and say, I can model that and extrapolate that or generalize it to some general feature of my brand, for example, brand sympathy or so. Or if I take, for example, if I recently there was a problem with Lufthansa app. And I Twittered them, there's this problem, and of course they have the problem. It's not only me, it's just me twittering them. Because it's a software problem. It's not my app installations. I deleted it, I reinstalled it. And on many phones, I have a company working with mobile phones, so I could try that with many different types of Android phones, and on neither it worked. So me as a symptom is enough. It's like for getting to know things about your brand, it might be sufficient to just listen to a single voice. You don't need to generalize it. It's like the falsification principle. It's sufficient to see one black swan to know that not all swans are white. Right. So I don't need to draw a sample of swans.
Right.
Yeah, okay, but the main problem is, and your example was a technical example from the technical word, and that's clear. So software is running, so one example or one listening or one consumer insight helps. But our main problem is obviously in management that we're not dealing with that, but we're dealing with a lot of social interactions where there is no real word or reality. And then obviously the question is, what happens if 10 consumers complain and 10 praise you? What is the real direction you should go? And so I think in the end we need these data, but in the end the question how to interpret and where's your level when to react is still problematic. you have to judge that, and that means experience, market knowledge, and knowledge of your organization is important. And obviously we had a lot of cultures also in organizations, in large organizations, also markets, where exactly this culture hinders you from doing exactly what you told us, what you can do, because you're working on that and you're only reacting if a level is broken, in a sense.
Isn't that the classic problem, though? It strikes me that that's the classic problem with both user-centered design as well as with data-centered design, that when we separate the instinct and that level of experience from it, we're letting the wrong things kind of control the course of our work. Like with user-centered design and data-centered design, we're listening to and taking too much guidance from the wrong sources. We need user-influenced design, data-influenced and maybe checked design, but at the end of the day, the primacy still has to live with the user experience designer, and I use that to mean whether they're a content strategist or designer, or visual designer, whatever that is.
But down there are new dynamics, as Jörg described, because you're right, that's a technical problem, but 20 years ago, one person would have that technical problem, would call the helpline or someone else, and now with the dynamics we have in the network, so how do you go about in teaching corporate communications management to sort of frame these dynamics?
Yeah, I think the main question, how can we understand communication or how can we understand management, hasn't really changed. That's my main message. You still need the different ways of data, how to interpret it. We still have to understand that there are interactions and futures which can be partly predicted on previous behavior, partly not. And if you have a framework in your mind where to look for, and then, because the world is evolving, you can say, okay, they're users, that's one part of my component. They have experiences, they have in different countries or regions, different ways of expressing this. Probably they ask you, probably you have markets where nobody asks you. And there are markets in the world where people don't speak out like they do in Western countries. So if you look at that, then obviously if you have this lot of data, which we have nowadays and have in the future, then you still can take a better decision. I think that's the basic thing. And if you look 200 years backwards and at the companies who were great then, trade companies from Italy or from the Hanse in Germany, what did they do? They had information systems. They had agents who knew how markets worked, obviously in totally different ways because they had to do that. And they had closed networks where they used their experiences of their consumers, of their markets, of their political influences, how to develop their markets. So in the end, the world hasn't really changed so much how you manage organizations or markets or interact with society, but obviously our knowledge and our interactions, our dynamics are totally different.
So, Margaret, how do you go about to sort of making organization knowledgeable about what they can do? Because you addressed the subject of culture, and when working in content strategy projects, you often refer to, okay, we need to sort of connect departments or silos we had for. So how do you go about that?
Well, I think going off of like what you were just saying, like if you look at organizations of yesteryear where they had all of those different inputs, both qualitative and quantitative, maybe by collecting, testing data and whatnot on their product and on how people were using it, but then also bringing in the anecdotes of use. I think that directly maps to how many modern organizations look, where we can be pulling data from the customer service center, like what's the length of their calls, what are the common keywords that are coming up on those calls. When people call saying, you know, they have a problem with maybe a certain aspect of a product or a certain feature, what's the word they're even using for that feature? Beyond the expletives that maybe they're using to describe how the feature is working. What are they actually using as the terminology? So we can be pulling that sort of quantitative information, and that's just looking at a customer service center, and then couple that with maybe information that's coming out of an editorial department or whoever's controlling terminology and kind of managing product organization, that sort of thing. Maybe we can also couple that with whatever's going on in product engineering to look at what features they're supporting, what they think will play well in the evolution of the product, looking at a product roadmap. So I think there's still opportunities to connect all of that information across different departments. Where the real challenge is describing the need for doing that, because so frequently in many organizations, it's easy to stay in our little silos because we know we're all part of the same company, but it's easy to forget that we all also have to answer to the same users, that's who's really signing our paychecks at the end of the day.
But so my question, because Ansgar, you elaborated that we as communicators sometimes do a poor job in explaining our contribution to reaching organizational goals, but the big data discourse has basically taken the attention of management by storm. So is that, well, looking at like the popular magazines, and I have the impression that a lot of people investing into IT and big data applications and big data companies, also as Jörg's, are sought after. So what is there a hope in management that will help them to work better with the complexity, or why is that happening?
I'm sure. So the question is, has it really taken the discourse? We think that communication, marketing, big data has taken it. If you look at, and that's the question of empirical research, look at boardrooms. Where do we have a chief information officer really on the top board level? We have chief marketing officers not on board levels in Germany, only on business unit levels. Communication officers mostly linked to the board, higher the marketing, less resources, but also not on the board. We have financial guys, we have human resources. Now in Germany, for example, we have a big discussion that we have, because gender issues, female compliance, we have compliance now on the board. That's a discussion over there. And we have a discussion about that, I totally agree. But I'm not quite sure whether it's really strategic, because looking 10 or 20 years ago, we always had an information of gathering knowledge, insight in different fields to make our decisions better.
Sorry. There's so many fields in businesses where information-driven companies have taken whole industries down. Amazon was my example, Google, Facebook, Airbnb, now Uber. So one industry after the other is completely turned over or turned down, disrupted, as we say in the West Coast, you know. And this is why it is a strategic thing. It's the most strategic thing that ever happened in economy, I'm sure, about that. It's not about making decisions that we used to do because we had consultants or we had our daily reports, and we would say, well, yeah, it looks like the stock price will go down, so we rebuy our stocks or so. This was gut feelings. And someone once said, gut feelings is the opposite of curiosity. With gut feelings, I'm always just looking backwards. It's experience that I have drawn from a past that is no longer viable information for the future, because things change very rapidly now. And so I would say companies that don't take the strategic step in becoming information-driven, in most industries, will face difficulties, to say the least.
Wait, can I just respond to that, though? So you called out like Uber and Amazon and Google. If we look outside of, I would say, the outliers, if we take out the #1 players in each of those industries and look at all of the other players, I think we still have a lot of gut instinct that is running many businesses fairly successfully. Wow. And I think the problem with that, though, and sort of the red herring of big data as a buzzword, is that we're training a generation of middle managers to cherry pick data. And that doesn't serve anyone either. They're not learning the instincts, or I guess maybe they're learning how to verify their own instincts with data sampled here,
here, and
here.
This is what they ever have been doing. So middle management was always just saving their own backs. This is always the problem with corporations where you have several levels of hierarchy. The top management might get a strategic vision, but you have the middle management just securing their own positions. It's called the clay layer, you know.
So are they doing it with a better buzzword now then? They're hiding behind a different kind of cloak then
Yeah,
to
I
hide their
think so.
decisions.
So, but is big data, is the big data the ring? And are you saying, okay, I'm going to take it and use it?
Yes.
Okay, so you got them.
Yeah.
So I fully agree with you, not to be misunderstood. I just said what I see, what is empirically happening in now. But I fully agree.
yeah, okay.
But I fully agree that it should be probably be different. But organizations are not very rational in that sense. They're very they're cultural, they're structural bound. And just to agree to you, yeah, it should be different. But I'm not so sure whether really today's organizations are able to integrate that, but exactly your examples show that the change doesn't come from the inside, the change comes from the outside. So because others build up new companies, new business models who are data-driven, that all obviously challenges traditional corporations what to do with them. And then obviously the question is probably more market or also society-driven, which we have now. So will those companies and business models succeed? Will the others adapt? Will society accept these models? That's also a question with the taxi drivers. That's a good question. We now have a discussion, a legal discussion, and also a societal discussion in Germany. Will we accept that? Interestingly, it's a political discussion. We don't know whether some business models will be allowed by society in different parts of the world. So I fully agree, it's important, but I think it's not so natural that organizations will take over. Probably it's more dynamic from the outside, from the market side.
So, just to be clear, referring to the societal context, I think what's would be a good point to open up the discussion to your questions. So, are you Frodo? Are you Gollum? Is it content? Is it context? So, and are those companies signs of change? And will that be the future? How would you? What's happening?
Okay, I have a question. So, big data is a bit of a black box. We don't really know causality. We heard George say that it's contingent what happens. We also know that as companies rely on big data, there seem to be stories told about what's happening. I mean, we naturally, as mammals, sort of want, intelligent mammals want to have a story about what's happening here. And I guess the question I have in my mind is what happens when we don't trust the stories we're telling about big data? So to give an example, I mean, Google originally was supposed to be able to predict flus based on search data, and then that relationship seemed to fade away to a degree. And I think there's a lot of things, because big data is contingent and there's correlations and stuff, we don't even really have reliable stories to tell about the data. And I kind of wonder, for those of us working in content, are we really trying to sell people big data when the story is going to constantly change what the big data is doing?
How do you sell big data, Jörg?
I would directly answer. I think that we should not sell big data. I would like that people who produce content use big data, use data, skip the big, and use data as an extension of your senses. You can't be everywhere, you can't have eyes everywhere, so data is just like your nervous system expanding all over the world. And this, I think this is, again, this is a metaphor how data should be used. Of course you can't trust your senses, but otherwise you can't, obviously there is no possible, your emotions won't allow you to distrust your senses either. And with data it's the same. You should always question the data, but on the other hand, you should regard it as extending your senses, and you should deal with it the same way you deal now with your sensual experiences. And so I won't rather sell companies standard big data tools off the shelf. Why should I? I would try to educate people like you, being in the content business, to utilize tools to tell better stories.
Right, but where does the confidence in the big data come from if it's all contingent? How do we even trust?
Yeah,
big
why
data
do I
enough?
trust my senses?
Right.
The essential David is Hume. Hume already concluded that our sensual experiences is completely contingent.
Right, but I think the point, and I won't belabor it, but the point I'm making is that our senses are really for a moment in time. You know, I rely on my senses I rely on that just for a few seconds, and then, but when we're making decisions which have a long gestation period, but we're relying on big data as though it's just sense, you know, information coming in.
What really drives decision makers from your studies?
No, so not from our studies, but you know, we have a lot of studies about decision making in private and in operational management context, and obviously that's culture driven. Strategy making in Asia is different from strategy making in Western countries, but they're different types, that's quite clear. So there are people who are more experience-based, then we have trust, obviously. If we don't know, if you're looking, your question was looking in the future, we have to trust, and we can trust also systems. So we can trust our experience that working on marketing data or probably on other kinds of data in 10 years' time, we know it worked out a lot of times, so then we trust these ways of taking decisions. And probably other people have more trust in their personal networks or in some people inside or outside the company whom they will ask. And so in the end, there are different patterns of taking decisions, and obviously data fits in it, and as I said, it's not new. But we have now no new quality, and probably making or taking decisions more based on this kind of data might fit better in this time.
I think you raise a good point, though, in that if we are to trust the quality of our data, it also means trusting our gut instincts. And I think maybe this is a little bit of what you're getting at of, you know, how do we know that we can trust that? How do we know that we can trust our senses and all? What a lot of, I don't know if you call it big data or just data, what a lot of studies reveal is that the more that we can diversify the people that are looking at the data, in other words, if we acknowledge that all experience is specific, well, if we bring more experiences to the table when we are looking at that data, then we can make better decisions. I mean, if we look into the very recent past and see economic fallout, certainly in the US, the housing recession, a lot of that was caused by people making decisions based on their gut instinct, and their instincts proved to be wrong when they were looking at the data. And then we look again at a lot of the large financial houses that were behind those decisions, and we see, oh, their boardrooms were all really consistent, really kind of homogeneous, really all, no offense, all male white guys that maybe shared a lot of the same life experiences. And we're realizing smarter companies bring a greater variety of personal experiences into the boardroom so that people aren't looking at the same data set with the same eyes, but are bringing different life experiences to it as well. I don't think that's just to be politically correct. I think that's to be correct.
Okay, so your answer to the rising complexity of the world is integrating that complexity and diversity into a corporate actor.
Yeah.
So, any more questions from you? Okay, when is barbecue, I suppose, is the next question. Stephanie, because you put forward so wonderful questions today.
Yeah,
join us.
That's the journalist in me. I always have questions about things. So my question is, we've been talking about this a lot from the corporate side. And of course, we're all corporate people here, corporate comms people probably. But when I read this headline, I was thinking about this from a consumer and people, personal kind of view, because people out there are really scared about big data, like the consumers we're talking about, the people we want to predict. So this headline sort of said to me, yeah, is it going to take over? Is it going to take over? You guys always looked at it from a positive way. How can we utilize it? But, you know, there is this saying in German that we're becoming glass humans. And big data certainly is helping with that. They can track where I go. We heard today that 40% is predictable and 60 isn't, which really calmed me down. But, you know, there's lots of people out there being scared. And my question would really be, should we be using this at all? Like, should we data mine? I mean, it's a very provocative question, I'm sure, and we should be using it, of course, but there is this Sauron and the Lord of the Rings thing in there, really, from an ethical point of view.
Is
And
that a weapon of mass communication, as Eric put to
yes,
it?
it has certainly an ethical point to it that we haven't discussed at all today. So I would just like to introduce that here. What is like the ethical responsibility of companies? Can we just mine all the data of all the customers we have and then use them in our best interest, or how should we deal with that? I'm just going to...
Yeah, so this is many questions at one time, actually. So the first is, as I said, and I'm completely convinced about that, there's no opt-out. And with billions of people now becoming mobilely connected to the net worldwide in cultures where there has never been a privacy discussion at all, I think this tool is taken off of our hands. So we can only have an ethical discussion now. We can't prevent it anymore. So that's the first, my opinion. So there is no chance to opt out. We have to deal with it if we want to or not. Second is, now it looks like corporate, like top-down. Big data is a tool to govern people, to force people to do things, to manipulate people doing things. What I see is we have the emergence of big data-driven tools like wearable technology, like self-tracking tools, the quantified self, where people start to track their own lives and interact socially with the data they collect from themselves. This will lead to a completely different perspective of force. It will lead to some kind of bucolic village-like control of one person to their direct neighbor. So we will end up in a, it's not a top-down enforcing things to people or manipulating things. So I think we will see an emergence of systems of self-organization that is a very moral thing, like it used to be in rural countries 200 years ago. So a pre-modern state. We might like that or not, but I expect that to happen.
That makes it even more scary because,
Yes.
I mean, because that makes
Full
it
agree.
sound like it has to be a top-down responsibility to educate people. Like we saw, it's also provocative, I know, but there was this thing from Facebook with the privacy dinosaur saying, hey, you've been posting this publicly all the time. Did you really want to do that?
But this is just a marketing gadget. You know, there's no real
But if you
value in that.
there is people out there, and I've seen this in schools a lot, who are not aware of what they're doing. Oh yeah, you can shake your head like that, but I feel personally that this is a big deal. Of people, we've seen this with this Amok guy in the U.S. with that girl. He accused of having caused him to do all these mass murders, and they took all her pictures on Facebook in a bikini and stuff like that. And I'm sure she wasn't aware that this could lead to that. And I think there is an education issue in there as well. But you go ahead with the first question I had with is this an ethical responsibility that companies have, which is sort of tying to that other thing. Did you want to answer to that, any of you guys?
In your study, the subject of corporate social responsibility always plays a role for communications.
Yeah, but that's something else.
Yeah.
So I think we have to divide between CSR in the sense and communicate about that, and we are talking now about the ethical responsibility of communicating or of gathering data. And that has nothing only to do with CSR, it's about everything, about internal communications. And think of internal communications. When we heard that's not only a legal issue, because you track your own employees, and on the one hand you can say, okay, it's good to know what they want to have and do, but in the end, it's their choice to work for that company or not. So obviously it is an ethical perspective, but I would fully agree again that this privacy discussion is a very Western one. I talked to some colleagues from Asia who did some research about privacy, exactly that issue, half a year ago. And they had a problem that in some countries in Asia, I think it was either Malaysia or Indonesia, I'm not quite sure, they don't even have a word for privacy. They don't have a word because of their culture. So it was very difficult to see that. They didn't see the problem. But it's, again, the same. It's not only positive for the consumers or employees over there. It's simply they're used to that because they enter this whole world of the modern world with this feeling. They don't have the question.
Yeah. Well, and I think like you said that we're entering into this new age of morality around our data and how we can personally use that. And I say this as somebody sitting up here wearing a Fitbit on which I've done only about 500 steps today. But I think that that's bullshit. I think that it's ludicrous to think that just by giving people more access to their personal data, we can then make better decisions.
No,
we can, but morality implies that we opt into those values. Self-determination means that we have to say, yes, I do want to use that information about myself to help me in the daily world.
This is the view of the Enlightenment. We derived this 200 years ago, 250 years ago. People came up to the idea of self-determination, and I have the fear, I would say it's not necessary that this happens, but I see, of course you are right. You are tracking your steps and try to optimize your fitness. This is also very Western, is a very liberal view.
Very privileged.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I've written texts about that to some length. This is the liberal fallacy that we suppose or presume people would be in responsibility for their own lives. I see it even worse. Morality has usually not been a question of opting in. No one has asked me to join the, I would say, European Christian morality I've been educated to. And so I had no choice. This was the way I was raised. So it was always kind of external social force that brought me to the moral thinking that I have as being a Catholic Christ now. I think that we might enter a state where seeing our neighbors so fully naked now, completely stripped down to their bones by having access to so much data about them, and it won't be private data anymore, and I don't believe that people really have a choice to opt out with Facebook. If I switch to only my friends can see my posts, it's still my friends. And everyone would ask, well, yeah, you have been on holiday. Why didn't you post any pictures? This is the classic, and it's the first step of this moral control that others impose to me in being public. And this being public leads automatically to what McLuhan called the global village. Exactly, that is what we will face. It's like small communities, and community is always a gated community in a way. There's always people who won't access that, who won't see my updates. But my neighbors, my friends or so, they will look for me, and they will judge me according to the things that I say, that I post, and that get measured and publicized by that way.
So when we consider the idea of a self and an other and the kind of the public that we construct, is it fair to say then that that kind of social contract has always been there? We just now have greater granularity around how we view it?
I think...
it might be sort of technically enhanced now.
Yeah, but no, one of the fathers of German sociology, Ferdinand Tönnies, famous for his book Society and Community. And he recognized, end of the 19th century, that the rural bucolic life, living in small communities with moral control, vanished away and gave way for the society. And for a short term of history, like 150 or 200 years, the modern society existed and had some freedom in that way for the individual. The individual is also a modern term. In a village, there is no such thing as an individual. If you know someone personal, there is no need to be an individual. You know, individualization is a modern thing. It's a societal thing. In the pre-modern world, that didn't exist, and I doubt that we will have this in 200 years from now. So I really see the movement back and losing all this freedom and coming back to pre-modern moral control things. We might like that or not. There are some advantages in that. Think of climate change. I know that from advertising research, people now start to blame their friends on social networks for being not climate conscious. It's just starting.
Okay, so it is just starting.
Yeah, and just to add on that one word, if you compare that with the international perspective, and I would fully agree on that from the sociological point of view, where in Asia we didn't have that term 150 years. We have a collective society and moral until now, it's very probable that that can happen. And that, obviously, we don't have an answer about that. And the question is, what can each of us, what can society, what can organizations within that society do about that? But I really think this is one vision which could happen. Yeah. And probably we have to take a broader decision about that, which takes off, and I think that was your intention, takes us a bit further on from the technical or management perspective to the world around us. So is that what we are acting in organizations, in societies, which we obviously take for given? And this is our modern society, but probably it's not the same in 50 years. And that's a quite interesting question if you think that the center of power and of also probably moral thinking will probably be not in the West in 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, I think this
we can't answer these obviously today, but obviously
but the thing is, because today we had marked as challenges, and I would think this really wonderfully sums that up, that we're just at the beginning to face the challenges. And so to map out the challenges is a challenge in itself, and I hope we started today. Tomorrow we will look more at the visions of that, and I would say now that challenge and visions are two sides of the same coin, and the way we work with our challenge, we also work with our visions. So now we having one comment.
Yeah.
It is.
Yes.
We hear you.
All right, good. Just going back really quick to the concept, like what you see coming up of the moral control of like kind of a community. And I can't remember the name of the book about the U.S. and people self-segregating into communities based on like-minded interests, and how that filtered, funneled into a breakdown of communities where you only hang out with people that think like you.
That was kind of Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle.
So like if somebody calls me out on climate change and exercises moral control, then I just block them and move on to people that I like.
Yeah, well, I think this is exactly what's happening. Is if you become so visible to others, to your neighbors, if you do not longer have your privacy of your house, but live as it used to be the case in pre-modern society with all your family and the broader family and all the village more or less on the same level and visible all the time. Also the aristocracy, they were also very visible all the time. They celebrated, from Louis XIV on, celebrated their visibility. And this is a very bourgeois thinking of having the right to be private. It was also in differentiating from aristocracy, that the bourgeois defined themselves as being not visible, as having such a private life also. And what I see in marketing, so let's stay down to the earth, is a trend. I've seen that coming like 5 or 6 years ago. It started when people started to criticize their friends for certain behaviors that they were not really aware of earlier. So, for example, people posting, "I can afford an expensive watch," is really uncool in an environment like Facebook, because what do you tell your friends? I can afford something that you can't. You don't do that anymore. So brands change. A very gifted marketing thinker from Havas, Umer Haag, you might know it, very prominent Twitter also, he has the theory, or he calls that moving from aspirational brands that make you want to be aspired to meaningful brands. If you wear these brands, you show your friends, I am not doing harm. I am one of your bunch or so. And this happens. Social media is really fostering this. And I expect that to become even stronger. And there's brands like IKEA that really profit from that trend. For IKEA, it's the best thing that could happen. People no longer buy expensive furniture. This was actually the first symptom. When I was working for Hubert Boda, we suddenly recognized a decline in the furniture industry. Brand furniture did no longer advertise for their brands. And we asked, why? And we came to the conclusion that people suddenly found it no longer satisfying to use brand furniture. And one of the most common arguments why they decided to, apart from why it's ballast, it's like you have to keep with your expensive things or so, is that people want to avoid being regarded as rich or as showing off or so. And this is something new.
It's about being socially acceptable.
Yes.
And also at the corporate level, the question is, where's your license to operate? What are you doing? How acceptable is that? And
I think you raised some good points around conspicuous consumption and how we demonstrate that, as well as then how brands can track that, both what we willingly opt in to share and then what we allow the data to support as well. But I think you also raised some good points around privacy there, and maybe there's as we talk about this kind of broader community and thinking more as a community rather than individuals, maybe there's a bit of a cultural schism there as well.
Yes.
I mean, you're citing Louis XIV's and visibility among the aristocracy, and something else that changed a couple hundred years ago. Part of the foundation of the United States is in declaring a right to privacy.
Absolutely.
Now, the definition for it, we're still trying to figure that out. I mean, even just this past week, the Supreme Court was kind of going after that with pickaxes. But I think as we figure out what privacy is, both in how we practice it, how we willingly give it up, and then how we attempt to rein it back in, as well as then how we police privacy. Data will have big data, how we monitor it, how we collect it, how we maintain it, how we share it. That will have to kind of come under that sort of policy, both at a legal level, country to country, which may be very different in the US, that has a declaration around privacy.
okay. Very good. So, Stephanie?
No more questions from
no
my
more
side.
questions? And thank you all for being here, staying so long, and